and start tonight's meeting. Let's please take roll.
Commissioner Lide, Commissioner Calandra, Commissioner Diaz.
Here.
Commissioner Kreiner, Vice Chair Bray,
Here.
Chair Vang,
Here.
Commissioner Shergill, I'm sorry.
Present.
All right, we'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone, if you can, please stand. Ready? Begin. Next, I'll go ahead and read the procedures for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being conducted in person and electronically. For each matter considered by the Commission, there will first be a staff presentation, followed by a presentation from the project applicant. Testimony from supporters of the project will then be taken, followed by testimony from those in opposition. The applicant will have the right to a final rebuttal presentation prior to closing the public hearing. In accordance with Section 13 of Article 2 of the Planning Commission Rules and Regulations governing the length of public debate, all public testimony from those in support and opposition of the project will be limited to 3 minutes per person. The 3 lights on the podium next to the microphone will indicate the amount of time remaining for the speaker. The green light will be turned on when the speaker begins. The yellow light will come on with a soft bell ring when 1 minute is remaining. The speaker should be completing the testimony by the time the red light comes on with the final bell indicating time has expired. All in-person public testimony must be presented to the Commission at the podium. Any testimony that references race, religion, ethnicity, economic status, national origin, or any other classification protected under state or federal law in a derogatory manner should be deemed irrelevant and will not be considered by the Commission in making its land use determinations. If you challenge these land use matters in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised in oral or written testimony or before the close of the hearing. Before we see if there's any changes to the agenda, let's please note that we have Commissioner Kreiner is present. That 41 South traffic is pretty bad, huh? Okay. All right, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Good evening, Chair Vang, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Israel Trejo with the Planning and Development Department. There are no changes to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any comments or a motion from the Commission to approve or accept the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Kreiner, a second by Vice Chair Bray. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion's approved. Do we have any reports by the Commission? I see none. We'll go ahead and move forward with new matters. This is item ID 241613. Consideration of a CUP application number P24024888.
Good. All right. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Juan Lara with the Planning and Development Department, and staff brings forth consideration today of conditional use permit application number P24-02448 and its related environmental finding. Subject site is generally located at the northwest corner of East Copper and North Portofino. Next slide. The subject property is generally surrounded by residential medium density to the west, previously approved residential low density and open space to the north, and planned residential medium low density and commercial to the east. The subject site is zoned RS5 with a planned land use of residential medium density. And staff would like to note that multifamily projects are permitted in the RS5 zoning with the conditional use permit subject to Planning Commission approval. Staff would also like to note that prior to project acceptance, the applicant held a neighborhood meeting and noticed property owners within 1,000 feet of the subject property. The project will consist of 90 multifamily units within 15 two-story buildings on approximately 7.57 acres, bringing the total density to 11.88 dwelling units per acre. The open space meets the requirements of open space, and staff would like to note that Council District Project Review Committee for District 6 recommended approval of the project, and also that the project meets all the development standards of the RM1 zone district. Staff included an image of the elevations for the commission's viewing. And with conclusion, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit application number P24-02488 and adoption of its related environmental finding. That concludes staff report, and we're open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions from the commission? Go ahead, sir.
So my question is, what's the public input on that? So people that reside, near that plot, so what do they have to say?
We did send a public hearing notice to 1,000 feet and didn't receive any comments or phone calls from the public. I know that there was a community meeting held as well. But recently we did not receive any comments or phone calls when we sent out our notice for public hearing.
I see. And then, is there like a price range on that? Like, are these like rental units?
I think, should I defer that to the applicant? Can I defer that to the applicant?
Thank you.
Before we move to the applicant, do we have any other questions from the commission?
I do. Just to follow up on his question, do you guys have a tally of how many community members came to those meetings?
Yes. I think the applicant will have a tally of how many community members attended the community meeting as well. Yeah.
Madam Chair, at that community meeting, do you have any of the findings on what some of those comments were that the applicant will share?
Yes. The applicant has the comments and the community meeting findings as well.
Okay.
Yes.
And Commission, you can find that in Exhibit G.
All right, any other questions for staff? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Do we have the applicant? Hello, miss.
Hi. Good evening, Planning Commission and Planning and Development staff. Thank you all for your time this evening. My name is Brenda Cosio, and I am the applicant and representative here on behalf of Granville Homes. I do just want to start off by apologizing on behalf of Mr. Asimi. He could not be here this evening. As some of you may know, tonight is the grand prize drawing for the Granville Home of Hope. So he will be out there with Mayor Jerry Dyer and Council President Annalisa Perea. And we will be recognizing 9 outstanding nonprofits this year as well. So I hope you all got your tickets and are going to be tuning in later this evening. Moving on to our application, I do just want to start off with clarifying some of the questions that you guys raised. First off, going back to the question of price range. Because we have not built this project, we don't have a price range necessarily established, but if we are assuming figures for 2024, and if we assume that the project was built today, we could estimate that the price range would be roughly between the mid-2000s. Again, that is just varies based off of our development itself. So, and then moving on to our community outreach meetings. This was held back in 2023 at the end of COVID, so we did hold it online over Zoom. Unfortunately, we don't have a sign-in sheet, but I am told that we had roughly 3 members of the community present. I don't have any comments that we did have there, but I do want to refer you guys back to Exhibit G, which does indicate what we discussed. So, moving on, I am here just to ask you guys respectfully for your approval on this application, and if you guys have any other questions, please refer them to me.
Thank you. Just for clarification, kind of going back to the question in regards to the price range, you're looking at market rate. That's what we're assuming, right?
Yes,
Okay.
market rate is correct.
Perfect. Any questions for the applicant?
Yes, I do. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I do see the letter, Exhibit G, that Jennifer asked us to look at. I did read the letter. However, there was no indication on what any public comment was or remarks were whatsoever. And I know you just stated that you don't have it on record. Do you have anything that would suggest what the community, what the community's input was? I know what was stated to the community, what was given to the community, but as far as the rebuttal back from community, do you have any findings whatsoever that the community had approved, or the community was disengaged, the community was dissatisfied, or they gave the go-ahead? Do you have anything like that?
I do not, unfortunately, but to refer to what Mr. Juan Lara had mentioned, we did meet with Council District 6 Project Review Committee, and they did approve our project unanimously. So I would assume that them being representatives of the area, that they did approve of the project.
Do you have any other questions? Thank you, Miss. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and go out to the public. Do we have any individuals who would like to speak in support of the project? I see none. Go ahead and go to the public. Any individuals who would like to speak in opposition? I see none. We're going to go ahead and close all public comments. We'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have any additional questions, comments, or motions from the commission?
I would like to set the motion to adopt the environment.
Sorry, can I make a comment, please?
Yes, go ahead.
You know, with the housing shortage, you know, I think it's great that people get an opportunity because that area is well developed, and I hope our whole Fresno look like that. West side, east side, north side, south side. That's a dream, but dreams do come true. So that's really good that, you know, we're providing people an opportunity to, you know, people who do not want to buy a house, just if they just want to live, you know, just having an opportunity, because we do have a shortage of housing. Sometimes rent is concerned for people, but with everything going up, with inflation going up, you know, sometimes it is what it is. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
With that, set the motion.
I'll second it.
The motion to adopt the environmental assessment and approve the conditional use permit.
Okay. So we have a motion made by Commissioner Diaz. We have a second by Commissioner Shergill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. Motion's approved. Thank you. So next item on the agenda, we're going to have item ID 241625.
Good evening, Chair. As we get set up for this particular item, I wanted to note that Sofia Pagaladas, our planning manager, is on Zoom if we have specific technical questions that need to be answered and those of us in attendance cannot answer them. But as you know, as a part of the city's general plan, there are certain elements of the general plan that are required by state law. One of which is the housing element. It is the only element in the general plan that must be reviewed and approved by the state. So we have spent an exhaustive couple of years working on it in collaboration with the other jurisdictions in Fresno County. This is the first time the city of Fresno joined into the multi-jurisdictional housing element. And so we are very excited to finally be at this point, and we have been working closely with the state to get a certified housing element. So with that, I would like to turn over the presentation to our consultant, who can go through the details and answer any specific questions you might have. Thank you, Chelsea.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, members of the commission and members of the public. My name is Chelsea Payne. I'm the Director of Urban Planning at Ascent. I'm part of the consultant team working on this multi-jurisdictional housing element update. Just briefly, the agenda for tonight's meeting, I'm going to give a very brief overview of the housing element, building off of what Jennifer just discussed. And then I'm going to focus on two major components of your housing element, which is your sites inventory and your assigned housing target, and then your action plan, which are the implementation programs that you're committing to implementing over the next 8-year planning period. I'm going to talk about the process we've been going through working with HCD, which is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and we'll kind of look at the timeline of all of the revisions we've been making, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. So first, an overview of the housing element. The housing element is ultimately a policy document that guides the city's actions related to housing development and housing-related programs. And every city and county in the state is required to prepare and adopt a housing element and show to the state how it's going to accommodate its fair share of the regional housing needs. And as Jennifer mentioned, it's an element of your general plan, but it is very different from the other elements of the general plan. It has a specific timeline in which it has to be updated, a deadline by the state. The deadline for adopting this housing element was December 31st of 2023. I'll point out that's almost a year ago, but you're not alone in missing that deadline. It's been a very challenging housing element cycle, and just about every city and county in the state of California has been about a year behind schedule, so that's not unusual. As Jennifer mentioned, it's also the only element of the general plan that's reviewed by the state for compliance with state law, and that's been about a year-long process that we've been going through to go through that state review. There's a lot of information in the document, as you probably saw in your packet. Because the city was participating in the regional effort, the regional housing element, your housing element contains both the regional chapters and the front end, and then every jurisdiction has a local appendix that contains all of the specific details to your jurisdiction. So all of the City of Fresno specific details are in those appendices where you have specific implementation programs, a detailed sites inventory, your local assessment of fair housing, constraints review, and other things specific to Fresno. There was a lot of community engagement that went into this process. A lot of that was early on in the process. We kicked off the housing element over 2 years ago in the fall of 2022. At that time, we had consultations with stakeholders through regional focus groups and forums, and also one-on-one consultations. The city held over 20 community and stakeholder workshops throughout the process. A couple of these were virtual, but a lot of these were in person in different neighborhoods around the city of Fresno. The first set of workshops focused on getting input from the community on the housing issues that they're facing and potential solutions for the housing element. And that input was used to shape the content of the housing element, the programs. And then after we published the draft housing element in the summer of 2023, the city held another round of workshops to get feedback from the community on the draft housing element. And then the city spent several months after that public review period revising the housing element in response to public feedback before submitting it to the state. So I'm going to talk first about your sites inventory, which is really a central piece of your housing element. So starting with your RHNA, in California, housing needs are assessed at a regional level based on population projections for the region. And a regional housing target, or it's called your regional housing determination, is assigned to every region of the state. So the Fresno County region was given a target of 58,000 housing units that, as a whole, Fresno County needs to plan for. In every region of the state, the Council of Governments, so here that's the Fresno Council of Governments, is tasked with adopting a methodology to distribute that regional need to every municipality within the region. And so HCD, the state assigned the county 58,000 housing units. And then based on the methodology prepared by Fresno COG, the city of Fresno was given a housing target of just under 37,000 housing units. And then you can see here how that 58,000 housing units is allocated among all of the cities and the county here in Fresno County. And given that city of Fresno is the largest jurisdiction, the city received 63% of that total housing target for the region. And the city's housing target of about 37,000 housing units is broken down by various income levels from very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. And we talk about the very low and the low income combined as the lower income RHNA. And your lower income RHNA is about 15,000 housing units. That's often the most challenging for cities to accommodate. But I will say here in Fresno, with a lot of high density zoning and changes you've made, that wasn't the most challenging to accommodate here. There was plenty of capacity. But just this slide also shows a little bit of context on income levels. So when we talk about a lower income housing, we're talking about housing for a 4-person household that earns up to $62,000 a year. So this gives a little bit of context on what those different income levels are. So once the city receives its housing unit target, it's required to then prepare the housing element to show that there's enough available land appropriately zoned to accommodate that number of housing units. So we prepare a very detailed inventory of all of the vacant or underutilized parcels where there's potential for new housing to be built. And we classify each parcel based on the income level that can be accommodated on the site. So this map shows all of those colored spots on your map are the available sites for housing that are counted towards meeting your city's RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And the most important factor for how we inventory the sites or classify them by income level is the density. So typically the higher the density, the more affordable housing becomes. And specifically, according to state law for Fresno, sites that have zoning that allow at least 30 units per acre can be counted towards your lower income RHNA. And so that's all of your downtown zoning, your mixed-use zoning, high-density residential. And then land that's zoned for medium densities, those generally get credited towards your moderate income RHNA. And then land that's zoned for single-family homes gets credited toward the above moderate income RHNA. And this summary table shows all of the capacity that's counted in the housing element. So your housing target, your RHNA, is on the top line. Towards the bottom, you can see the total capacity, and then you can see that there's a surplus of capacity at all income levels, which shows that you have sufficient capacity to meet your RHNA. So next I'm going to highlight some of the key programs from the city's Housing Action Plan. This is section 1E1 of the appendices. And the city's Housing Action Plan contains 50 policies and 37 implementation programs that are organized around the 7 goal topics that are shown here. One of the major themes that's addressed throughout the housing programs is affirmatively furthering fair housing. As you all know, there have been a lot of changes in state law affecting housing. One of the most significant new laws affecting this round of housing elements was Assembly Bill 686, which mandates that all public agencies in California take actions to affirmatively further fair housing, or AFFH for short. And this means taking meaningful actions to combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive communities where everyone has equal access to opportunities. So in the housing element, the city is required to look at all of its housing programs through the lens of affirmatively furthering fair housing. And there are really 2 major approaches to the AFFH strategy. The first is to create opportunities for a greater variety of housing, including affordable housing, in your higher resource areas. In the map here of Fresno, the higher resource areas are those that are shown in blue. And these are generally areas that have more amenities, better performing schools, and greater economic opportunity. So one side of the AFFH strategy is to have implementation programs that rezone land for multifamily in high resource areas and target financial resources for affordable housing in these areas. And then the other aspect of the AFFH strategy is to focus grant funds and other financial resources to improve lower resource areas. And those are the areas shown in light green, and also in areas of concentrated poverty, which are areas shown in yellow on the map. So programs in the housing element focus on revitalizing these areas to improve the quality of life in these neighborhoods. So this was a major focus of the state across California in this round of housing elements. So I'm going to go through the programs in each goal section. I'll highlight those that might be of greatest interest to the Planning Commission. I'm not going to go through every single program here. But the programs in this first goal section are about accelerating housing production at all income levels across the board. And there are 10 programs in this section. I'm going to highlight the 4 that are shown here in bold. So first, program 2 is called A Variety of Housing Opportunities in High Resource Areas. And this is an important part of the city's AFFH strategy that I just described. The program commits to creating capacity for 2,500 multifamily housing units in high resource and high income areas by allowing residential in the office zone, by zoning to allow multifamily within a quarter mile of transit, and then other zoning amendments to provide for multifamily. It also commits to supporting the development of 400 missing middle housing units in single-family zones, so duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. Program 4 is about streamlining the development review process. It calls for developing procedures to implement Senate Bill 330 and SB 35, which are the state's streamlining laws. And it also calls for reviewing the city's entitlement and permitting processes to try to shorten the average timelines. And so the program commits to establishing more non-discretionary approval processes for certain housing types, removing the appeal provisions for development permits, and making certain housing applications ministerial if they're consistent with objective standards. And this is really the direction that a lot of cities across the state are going in order to comply with changes in state housing law. Related to that program is Program 6 to develop objective development and design standards by December of 2025. So in order to approve more housing through non-discretionary, it's really important that the city has really clear and objective standards. Program 9 is similar. It implements a new requirement of state law related to non-discretionary approval of housing on sites that are in the lower income inventory. So what state law requires is that the city would permit housing developments that have at least 20% affordable lower income units, and the city has to permit those by right, subject to non-discretionary review on sites that have been included in multiple housing element cycles. Goal 2, the programs in this section are specifically focused on facilitating affordable housing, and there are 11 programs that offer a range of incentives and financial resources and really creative strategies for getting affordable housing built. I'm just going to highlight Program 17, which is related to surplus public lands. This program calls for the city to review all city-owned sites by June of 2025 to identify sites that would be appropriate for affordable housing, and then to come up with a strategy to get housing built on those sites. And so the program has very specific timeframes for moving these sites forward, timeframes for rezoning the sites if that would be needed, and specific timelines for the disposition of the sites and completing entitlements. And the state really wanted to see firm commitments and timelines in this program. Goal section 3, this is about preserving and improving the existing housing conditions through housing rehabilitation, which is program 22, and code enforcement described in program 23. And then goal section 4 is about supporting the development of housing for special needs groups. So this includes seniors, people with disabilities, farm workers, and those experiencing homelessness. And I'll highlight program 25. So the program in this section that's most relevant to the Planning Commission is this one, and that it contains a pretty long list of changes needed to the development code to comply with state laws. Most of these are related to special needs housing. There are certain state laws about needing to permit emergency homeless shelters, low barrier navigation centers, residential care facilities, single room occupancy units. And so this program details all of those changes that are needed to come into compliance with state law. It also includes making sure that the city's density bonus and accessory dwelling unit ordinances and other regulations comply with state law. So these are a lot of things that will come back to the Planning Commission over the next year. The programs in Goal 5 are specifically focused on addressing fair housing, environmental justice, and equitably investing resources in lower resource neighborhoods. Program 27, this program makes a connection between the housing element and the environmental justice element that the city is currently working to prepare. It calls for the environmental justice element to contain certain policies that are listed here to address pollution exposure, access to facilities and healthy food and sanitary housing. And it also calls for monitoring the impact of the environmental justice policies on improving living conditions in disadvantaged communities. Program 28 commits the city to prioritizing investments in disadvantaged communities, including annually seeking grant funding to support infrastructure and other improvements in disadvantaged communities. It describes in detail new community centers, improved parks, pedestrian and bicycle improvements, transit service expansion, and other wet infrastructure improvements in disadvantaged communities. The program also includes a commitment to develop an online tool and doing quarterly reporting so that the public can understand what investments are taking place. And then the last goal section is about preventing displacement and addressing homelessness. There are 6 programs in this section. Program 33 is about preserving the city's existing mobile home parks through code enforcement, rehabilitation, preventing excessive rent increases, and resident engagement. There's also a commitment to establish regulations to preserve mobile home parks or prevent displacement by requiring a replacement of those units if there's a project that would replace the mobile home parks, and also some relocation assistance or finding alternative sites. And then the last program I'll highlight is program 36, which is about addressing homeless issues. There are a lot of aspects to this program, including funding for shelters, transitioning motels into supportive housing, exploring a safe parking program, providing mobile showers and restrooms, and a lot of other actions. One of the goals is to maintain the inventory of at least 500 shelter beds and create 400 new units of supportive housing. All right, so As we mentioned, we've been working through the housing element for about 2 years, and about half of that time has been spent working with the state on rounds of review and revision. And I know this is very hard to read, but it shows the general timeline for the project. So it shows that we kicked off engagement back in 2022, and then we published the draft housing element in July of 2023. That's the icon shown in the first green icon there. After another round of public engagement, we submitted the housing element to the state back in November of 2023, so just over a year ago. We received our first comment letter from HCD, from the state, in February of 2024, and then we spent several months working on very detailed revisions to address the state's comments and resubmitted back in August of 2024. So I'm not going to go through each of these dates, but what you can see is that there was a lot of back and forth, getting comments from the state, submitting revisions, back and forth. We also highlighted here in orange the various comment letters that we received from the Leadership Council of Justice and Accountability, who provided a lot of comments throughout the process. And each time we took those comments into consideration as we were making revisions and addressing the comments by the state. So we feel pretty confident after all of these multiple rounds of revisions. We are expecting by the end of this week to get a pre-certification letter from the state. That pre-certification letter should essentially say that once adopted by the City Council and formally submitted to the state, that the state will find the housing element in compliance. So we're crossing our fingers that that's what's going to be in the letter. There's always a chance that something, there'd be some surprises, but we've all worked very hard to address the public comments and comments from the state to get to this point today. Just very quickly, to summarize the things that the state focused on, they really wanted to see how the city was addressing public comments, so we had a lot of discussion about that. There were a lot of changes to the fair housing analysis, and a lot of changes to the sites inventory. I wouldn't say changes, but a lot of work to justify all of our assumptions. And then really a lot of the state's comments were strengthening the implementation programs, making them more specific timelines, and then geographic targeting. So that's the general theme of their comments. So that brings us to just next steps in the process. As I mentioned, the City Council hearing is scheduled for next week, December 12th. If the City Council chooses to adopt the housing element, we would then submit it to the state. The state would technically have 60 days to formally certify the housing element. We've been finding that because we've gone through a lot of discussion, we've been finding that they're doing that certification much faster. So we would hope to get the housing element certified before February 2025, but that would be the drop dead date by which the state would certify. So with that, I'll leave the staff recommendation to the Planning Commission up here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. It looks really good, but one of the things we often hear is there's a lot of focus on north end of town rather than in the southwest or central. And so is there going to be equal or more focus on the more needy areas? I don't see anything like that in the plan. I don't know if it could be in the plan, but that's what we hear a lot.
Yeah, would you like me to answer that, Jennifer?
Sure, you can go ahead and I'll jump in if we need more. Yeah.
There's a lot of attention in the housing programs on directing investments and resources into South Fresno, the southern part of the city. Some of the programs at the end, program 27 and 28, specifically get to that issue. It's really about prioritizing community improvements, investments, grant funding, and other things to improve, to bring more amenities and facilities to those parts of Fresno. So that's definitely a theme of this housing element.
How are they prioritized?
So there are a number of ways that the city prioritizes its investment. A really great example is Measure P. So Measure P adopts every 3 years I think it's 3 years, it could be 2 years, but they adopt a prioritization, so highest needs neighborhoods. So how are the dollars for Measure P going to be invested? So that's one example. Right now, the active transportation plan is being drafted, and there is an identification of needs based on areas of the community that do not have active transportation opportunities, whether that's bicycle lanes, sidewalks, trails, et cetera, how to prioritize those. So those are examples. Additionally, one of the commitments in the plan is that the city, and it's already under development, but the city will develop and make public essentially a story map on our website that will show where investments are being made in our community. So whether those are road investments, whether those are public utility investments, park investments, et cetera, those will be mapped and those will be shown on the city's website through a story map that will be able to identify that, yes, the city is investing in areas of greatest need, whether those are park dollars or other dollars, so that we are rebuilding communities that exist today.
Thank you.
So we're not just speaking about housing, but we're talking about the whole comprehensive, holistic approach there, correct?
That's correct. And really it's that Assembly Bill 686 that changed the scope of the housing element to look beyond just building housing, but about building communities and community investment. So the scope of the housing element has expanded.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Can we please go, excuse me, can we please go back to the map? Let's have some questions on the map, please. Yes, thank you. May you please elaborate on, like for example, like the dark blue is highest resources, then you got the moderate and the green, and then low resources. Mm-hmm. Just can you provide more information, like how do they come up with that? What do they mean by, hey, you know, this area has the highest resources and this area has the lowest resources?
Sure, yeah, I skimmed right past that, so that's a great question. This is a map that's produced by the state. It's called it's produced by the Tax Credit Allocation Committee, who oversees low-income housing tax credits. And they've worked to classify every census tract around the state based on low to high resource. And it's used for the state and for local jurisdictions to direct dollars for low-income housing. And so they classify something as, they look at a whole bunch of different factors of economic opportunity, educational opportunities, environmental conditions, and they, high resource areas are those census tracts that rank really high in terms of economic opportunities, well-performing schools, environmental conditions. And then on the other end, low resource areas rank poorly on those, and then areas of concentrated poverty have higher concentrations of poverty and lower income households. So this is a state-created map, and they update it every year based on available census data. But what the state is trying to do is to direct more funding for affordable housing to high-resource areas, rather than continuing to put lower-income housing in areas where there's concentrated poverty. So it's to help guide those investments by the state.
So I'm actually looking at, it's called a West Area Neighborhood Pacific Plan. I was actually part of that, and we spent like so many years on that. And one thing we hear in that community, Forgotten Fresno, and I'm talking about west of 99. So I do see that triangle in there, it's actually in the, kind of like in the moderate. So is the state saying that they'll bring more resources into that?
It's hard to say. You know, this is state-created data, looks at a lot of different variables. But I'm seeing what you're saying is it's moderate resource. So it didn't really rank high or low. It was somewhere in between.
Right.
And so there's not as much attention, I guess, on moderate resource. But you can think of moderate resource as more in line with the high resource, I would say. But the state really looks at directing community improvements, revitalization in low resource areas, and creating more low-income housing opportunities in high-resource areas.
I see. And then I also have a question for our city. Where are we with the West Area Neighborhood Pacific Plan? Any progress on that?
Yeah, so as you know, council had some changes, directed us to make those changes. The draft environmental impact report will be recirculated in early 2025 with adoption sometime in mid to late 2025.
Cool. Thank you. By the way, great job on the presentation, though.
Any other questions or comments?
You did a great job explaining a difficult subject.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and go out to the public. Do we have any individuals who would like to speak in support? This is going to be in support of the project? Okay. All right, so next I'll go ahead and go out to the public. Any individuals who would like to speak in opposition? Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Des. I am from Fresno Homeless Union, and also We Are Not Invisible. I was previously unhoused here on the streets of Fresno, California. So for the past 10 years, I have dedicated my life to the streets of Fresno, California to find out what the problem is. And the problem is no housing. The problem is talking about affordable housing when affordable is not affordable for us at 50%. 50% AMI here in Fresno, California is not affordable to get anybody that's living on the streets that has mental illness or substance use disorder to be able to get well enough, because they see you can't have a job in rehab. So where do you expect them to go, right? So we have a lack of affordable housing at 30% or less. That's what I want to hear, especially in our low-income neighborhoods. You can talk about doing the streets and the sidewalks. Well, we got sidewalks that we have poles in the middle of that we can't even get a wheelchair past, but we're arresting the homeless for being on the sidewalk. You know, we got parks that we're closing down. Old Man's Park. You know, we got parks on D5 that we've been promised to have grass for about 5 years, and it's still yellow and muddy. You know, so I think we need to focus on housing at affordable for individuals that are actually living here in Fresno, California, south of Shaw, because we're being ignored and ignored and ignored. The hottest spots for unhoused is D3. Is that where we're going to keep on keeping the low-income people, keep us all in one neighborhood, keep us all down there below the Shaw? Fresno homeless faces excessive arrest. We've had 181 arrests as of today for merely not having a place to sleep on the streets. That cost every single one of you money out of your pocket, because you guys are going to be being the taxpayers that will be paying that next year when you find out that the city will end up spending $62 million for the whole year to incarcerate an individual for merely having no place to sleep, right? Study shows here, there's the UCSF study. I can't talk about it, but you guys have access to it. The mayor does, and everybody else has. That study shows that Fresno's situation is worse than the state's average. So I hope you guys read that. I hope they give you permission to read it, because you all need to read that study. And the city's actions, including the police to use to take our you guys, It's housing. Homelessness sucks out here. There's a lot of drugs, and you can't go and get clean after 90 days, let alone if you go through rehab, where do you go? Back to the streets. It's human trafficking. That's what the city is allowing. It's human trafficking on these streets every single day, because you see people with mental health issues and substance use disorders, they don't have a chance if you don't have nowhere for them to go. And city of Fresno has nowhere for them to go. But yet you will sit there and tell a homeless man to go get a job, go get a life, go get better, and then they do, but when they come out, they have nowhere to go. But guess what happens? They get to be arrested now. Why go through 90 days for nothing and come back to nothing? Affordable housing needs to be at 30%. I know my time is up, and thank you guys for not cutting me off. I appreciate it. But I have so much to say, and please, 30%, and they'll say the rest of it. God, do 5 minutes, dude. Like, next time, do 5 minutes. I got a lot to say. It's my first time, you know?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the passion. Thank you. Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Giovanna Morales with Leadership Council. We are, while we acknowledge the work to date, the plan before you does not meet the state's affirmatively furthering fair housing duty. HCD's October 7th, 2024 findings letter identified deficiencies the city needs to address in order to comply with state law, such as including a complete assessment of fair housing, revising programs based on the completion of that assessment. Goals and actions must also be significant and meaningful enough to overcome identified segregation patterns and trends. The city has not completed an adequate assessment of fair housing, and without a complete assessment, the city is unable to adequately revise the programs. Additionally, HCD's findings letter directs the city to revise its programs to include geographic targeting, specific metrics, specific commitments, and specific timing, among other things. Additional changes are needed to fully comply with HCD's findings. We strongly urge the city to incorporate community-identified programs that are needed to respond to the city's critical housing needs. These programs would affirmatively further fair housing and replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. Community residents are asking for stronger place-based and mobility strategies, such as rent stabilization with just cause ordinance, an inclusionary housing ordinance, a rental assistance program, implementation of land use changes to rezone industrial use and prohibit future industrial uses near sensitive receptors, and codifying the eviction protection program into the city's municipal code, and committing to ongoing funding to the program. In addition to the substantive deficiencies outlined above, adopting the current draft as amended by its 2 mid-review errata would be inconsistent with the procedural requirements of housing element law. Government Code Section 65585 requires the city to obtain HCD findings on a draft housing element prior to adoption. AB 2020-23 includes language clarifying that when a jurisdiction changes its draft housing element to respond to the prior HCD findings, it must submit the draft to HCD and obtain new findings on the amended draft prior to the adoption. The bill notes that this language is discretionary of existing law, declaratory of existing law. Accordingly, adopting this draft without having received compliance findings by HCD will violate Government Code Section 65585. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening, Commission. My name is Marisa Moraza, pronouns she, her, hers. I work with Power California, and our offices are located at 3636 North 1st Street. Power California, we have signed on to the various comment letters submitted by Leadership Council this year, and in particular, our organization works with young people of color across the city of Fresno. And our base of members throughout the city, we work with hundreds of young folks, are deeply impacted by housing insecurity. This is the #1 issue that comes up across our base, and including their families as well. And it's the rising cost of living, the inability to meet the demand of rising rent, in addition, coupled with stagnant wages and lack of housing options that are habitable, deeply affordable, remain top concerns within our communities. And so we just want to reiterate what has already been mentioned by folks as well. And we stress that the Commission does not adopt a non-compliant housing element. And in particular, the city must incorporate community-identified programs with meaningful actions that will affirmatively further fair housing. And in particular, I do want to stress a few programs that have been listed time and time again, not only in the comment letters, but also at the public workshops. And we also know that the workshops have not been the most inclusive spaces for folks, or most accessible spaces as well. So also want to note that we want to make sure that we incorporate a emergency rental assistance program and incorporate we want to incorporate a rent stabilization and just cause protection ordinance. This is a top concern for our community members. This program was removed entirely from the July draft, November draft, and even after continuous advocacy from residents. And we know that our communities are not only cost burdened, but severely cost burdened as well. And there's a high percentage of the population in the city of Fresno renters that are paying over 30% and over 50% of their income as well, a monthly rent. We also strongly recommend that the city improve the eviction protection program by adopting and implementing a comprehensive eviction protection program and ensuring that there is designated and ongoing funding. There was success through advocacy from organizations and community members in the city to ensure that this continues to be funded. However, it is marginal funding, and we need to make sure this is codified in the city as well. And then just lastly, on the note on homelessness, we do want to acknowledge that without an analysis of the city's criminalization of homelessness, the assessment and the fair housing components remains incomplete. And so what this means is that there is a lack of acknowledgement of the recent anti-camping ordinance that has been passed citywide. We also know that there have been anti-camping ordinances passed throughout the county as well. And so this analysis fails to incorporate the impacts of this ordinance and future of that. So again, we urge Plan Commission to not adopt the non-compliant housing element until these issues are addressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. How are you doing? Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
One sec. Oh, okay, it doesn't go any higher. Okay. My name is Enrique Little. And I, like many other citizens of this great city, I am here to voice my opposition to the housing element. This proposal not only fails to address the needs of the houseless community of Fresno, but it does not even comply with fair housing mandates set forth by the state of California. The regional policies in Exhibit C mention vulnerable communities such as seniors and people with disabilities, but this is ignorant of the fact that not only are houseless people the most vulnerable citizens of Fresno, but that homelessness can and often does intersect with age and disability. If this proposal was truly meant to look out for those people, it would start and end with addressing the needs of that community. Also mentioned in the regional policies are incompatible and disruptive activities on land. To this I ask, is the survival of our neighbors incompatible and disruptive? Exhibit C, Policy 7.2 says it wants to protect residents from homelessness, but its true purpose is to protect people from seeing homelessness. This policy will not help anyone. The proposed measures of crisis intervention training for law enforcement and officers and members of the HEART team will only work if the training is actually used. In reality, the way that this is enforced is non-compliant with the fair housing mandates set forth by the state of California in a number of ways, and this measure further flies in the face of not only those mandates, but the values that we have as human beings and as citizens of the Central Valley. I, like many other members of this community, express my disapproval and frankly disgust with how this city intends to treat this community, addressing real issues with not solutions, but with cruelty meant to be swept under the rug. And I implore this council to take another plan of action. I implore this council to have a heart. Instead of making decisions to improve how Fresno residents live, where they work, where their kids can play and go to school, you are making decisions on how Fresno residents will die in our streets. And I hope you keep this in mind when considering this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other individuals who would like to speak in opposition? Let's go ahead and we have some concerns from the public. Do you mind if we have the city or the consultant potentially address?
Yeah, so Chelsea and I can take those as you raise them. So if you have specific questions you would like for us to answer, we'll determine who needs to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think one of the concern was having resources kind of south of Shaw, making sure that those areas are provided with the same type of resources that's going to be allocated throughout the other cities too, or if anything, will be given priority in regards to the resources.
Yeah, so we have specifically, obviously, in addition to Program 36, there are additional programs that are directly related to resource allocation in areas of highest need. Again, some of those are going to be south of Shaw, some of them are not, as the council identified in its highest needs priority for parks, for example, Pinedale. So there are a number of communities throughout the city, Herndon Town, Pinedale, that are not necessarily south of Shaw, but throughout the city, priority will be given in terms of resources to areas of greatest need. As it relates to housing, obviously there is a high priority for us to evaluate and to provide funding for and capacity for the lowest income groups that we talked about earlier, that our consultant mentioned, that we have, we're driving all of our resources towards figuring out how to incentivize those units to be constructed in areas of higher resource, right? So ensuring that new housing units for those in those lowest income groups are able to find housing in high resource neighborhoods, right? So it's a both and. It's funding for housing in high resource areas, and it's funding for investment in disadvantaged neighborhoods. So it's a both and across the programs. And if Chelsea, if you wanted to add anything to that.
So I have a question. Several of the people mentioned that there were several areas that are non-compliant with the state's rules. So Chelsea, as they went back and forth, it sounds like the state has approved what you've done, but these people are mentioning that they're not compliant, so I'm confused.
Sure, this is on, yeah. I think some of that is a bit of a matter of opinion. There isn't a bright line of compliance, and there's a lot of subjectivity to say whether or not we're in compliance. We've been working very closely with the state over the past year in addressing all of their comments. We don't have a letter saying, yes, this draft will be found in compliance, but we have made a lot of revisions, a lot of very specific revisions and wordsmithing, and working with the Leadership Council on some revisions up until a couple of weeks ago. And so it's ultimately the state who determines whether or not the city is in compliance.
Thank you.
So earlier, actually, I'm looking at the report. They were in the report it said over 400 people participated. What were their comments about this?
We summarized all of the comments in, I think it's section 6 of the appendix, if someone has that section, but all of that is summarized in the housing element. And I know I was not at those workshops. The city staff ran those workshops.
Let's go. We went ahead and closed our public comments already, but thank you. I appreciate the passion.
Yeah, so if you look at section 6, this summarizes the comments from the community workshops. There's a list of all of the workshops and where they were held. And then there were some initial workshops held, and then the city felt that more outreach was needed, so that the city went through another contracting process to bring on community partners. to really expand the reach into other neighborhoods in Fresno. So maybe someone from city staff who was there could speak to that.
Sophia, can you unmute and talk a little bit about community engagement? What were some of the things that you heard at the community engagement and through our partners? Maybe talk about how the partners reached out in the communities, and then how were those addressed specifically in the housing element?
Yes, Director Clark and Planning Commission, members of the public. The outreach was a very community-based and extensive, and we did work through our local community-based organizations to try to reach deeper into our community. And so we worked with 5 community development corporations. Southwest, CDC, Hidalgo, CDC, and give me one moment. I'm gonna pull up my notes right here. El Dorado Park Economic Development Corporation, Highway City Community Development Corporation, and Lowell Community Development Corporation. And we also had the assistance of Every Neighborhood Partnership, and a team of city staff worked with these CDCs and EDC to become familiar with the housing element, and then ask them to convene their members in their neighborhoods with information that we had provided about the housing element. So, and we did this in several rounds of outreach. There was one initial round and then two follow-up rounds, and we reached over 400 residents, and we documented all of the input that we received, analyzed it, and incorporated it into the housing element. Just in all of the programs really reflect what we heard. Of course, some of the big themes were need more affordable housing and infrastructure needs. But we heard a large variety of needs and suggestions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments to the city? All right, thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have any comments or questions? And just to clarify too, what we're doing is we're making a recommendation to the city. We're not going to adopt anything at all, right? It's more a recommendation. I think more importantly too is, I see and there's tons of passion out there. And what I would encourage is if we go ahead and recommend this to the city council, I would want you guys to go out there and speak to the city council too, because ultimately they're going to be the ones to make this decision. Okay, so I would want you to go out there, have that conversation, and ask for 5 minutes to speak. Okay, all right. Do we have any questions, comments, motion from the commission?
Brother Chair, I would also make a recommendation that there's been a lot of discussion regarding D3, District 3, which is the district that I represent. I too agree with our chair, not only to go before council, but also maybe have a conversation with the city council representation as well regarding the need and necessity for housing in certain areas that are disenfranchised. The fight for that is not a new fight. It's a historic fight. It's a fight that has been constantly talked about over and over and over and over and over and over again. But it also takes more than just 2 individuals, 3, 4 individuals to do that. There's an effort that needs to be rallied as well. Trust me, I know that fight. I know that fight well. I've known that fight for 20 plus odd years. And it's very necessary for us to do that while speaking together on it. So I echo what our chair is saying. I echo the passion. I haven't seen passion like that in a long time. And so I echo it as well.
With that being said, I'll go ahead and make a motion to recommend to the city council all staff's recommendations. My motion's on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll second it.
I'm going to go ahead and give this to, I'll second this to Vice Chair Bray, if that's okay. All right. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion's approved. Thank you. But my apologies. Thank you. But thank you.
Every day, 10 years I've been in these streets. 10 years I've dealt with the trauma, the beatings from the police, the politics at City Hall telling us the same thing for 10 years. How many times do you guys want me to come to these meetings? I'm about to freaking lose my mind because I've been fighting for my city by myself, and you're right, nobody comes to support me, not even my own people. So I'm standing here fighting for a city full of people that are dying on our streets, 120 people a year. Do you understand that?
I do. No, I have a sister that deals with mental health issues too. So I can completely sympathize with you, but there's a but listen, this is but think. No. You keep going. You keep going, but
Dear, I've been going for 18 years and I haven't stopped. And then don't lose hope. No. Dear, hear us out. Hear us out.
No, this is,
Hold on,
let me,
hear us out. We heard you, now hear us out for a second, okay? In actuality, the next step that you need to go to supersedes our steps anyway. If you want a voice and you want an audience to hear you, that's why we're pushing it where we're pushing it to, so that you have that voice. If you lose hope and if you quit today, what's going to happen if my daughters are homeless? Hear me out. Now, I heard you. Now, hear me, please, sweetheart, because I know your frustration. I know your frustration. I pastor in this area. I may not be able to stand where you stand, but I stand there every single Sunday, Monday through Saturday. I walk those streets. As a matter of fact, the majority of let me finish. Let me tell you, I wish I can tell you why I just helped you. I really wish I could tell you why I just helped you. The audience that you're going to stand in front of is a larger audience that has a more powerful voice than this audience that you're standing in front of right now.
City council members care anymore. They do not care no more.
Dear,
Everybody's term is coming up. They don't care.
dear,
They came here to prevent it from going to City Hall.
dear,
I've gone to City Hall for 10 years.
dear.
You can't tell me I've gone to the state. I've gone to Arugula. I've gone to Costa. I go to the state all the time.
Well, I don't.
So how much higher do I have to go?
I tell you this. Then if you stop, I'm not. So even if you stop, I'm still not stopping.
You have the power to sit up there and actually bring more housing, low income, affordable, into D3.
Here's what's amazing is you don't know how much power we just gave you.
No, what power?
but listen, so what I'm going to do, Commissioner Kleiner, we're going to go ahead and stop all these comments. Okay, we're going to move forward with the meeting.
No, don't.
You're fine.
Keep your hope up. We just don't want you to lose hope, so keep fighting.
No.
There you go. Keep fighting. You got this, sis. Keep fighting, please. Thank you,
All right,
Chair.
so we have a motion on the table. We have a second by Vice Chair Bray. I'm going to make this comment too, that this housing element is currently better than what we have. Okay, right? So if we keep on delaying this process over and over again, we're going to continue to have the same issues. So I'm just want to push this thing forward. If anybody out there has any additional opinions, then please go out there and speak when this is being reviewed by the City Council. Okay. So all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Motion's approved. All right, do we have any reports by the Secretary?
No, not tonight, Chair. Just want to remind you, please let staff know if you're not going to be available for our next meeting. We do have a full agenda for December 18th. Awesome. Thank you.
Sounds exciting. Appreciate it. Everyone, it's 7:14, meeting's adjourned.